Welcome to Grappling with Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guest today. With me is Kimberly Davis, who is an author, TEDx speaker, and founder of the Brave Leadership University, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. Peter Winick works with individuals and organizations to build and grow revenue streams through their thought leadership platforms and is host of the Leveraging Thought Leadership podcast. And Kimi Hirotsu Ziemski is founder of KSP Partnership, providing project management and project leadership courses and workshops to improve team dynamics and communications. Thank you all for being with me again.
Thanks so much for having us, Yonason. This is terrific.
If you keep getting invited back, it means you're doing a great job. Well, I'm grateful for your time. So here's our topic for today, true story, or so I'm told. An elderly Jewish man with late-stage cancer was given only a few weeks to live by his doctors. His final wish was to spend his last days in Israel and be buried there. So he booked a flight and made arrangements for hospice care when he arrived. A woman affiliated with the hospice organization volunteered to accompany him to the airport to ensure that he safely boarded his flight. However, when they arrived at the counter, the gate agent looked at the gentleman, immediately took note of his frail appearance, and declared that it was unsafe for him to fly, denying him permission to board the plane. After several unsuccessful attempts to convince the agent to reconsider, the woman took off her string of pearls, handed them to the agent, and said they were his if he let the man board the flight, which he did. The woman did not ask for any compensation from the elderly passenger, who never even learned her last name. He boarded the plane and never heard from her again. Was the woman a hero for sacrificing her precious necklace, or was she a criminal for bribing the gate agent? Was the gate agent being overly officious or simply following protocol? Were the airline restrictions too strict, too ambiguous, or entirely reasonable to avoid a mid-air emergency? The floor is open.
You don't pick easy ones, do you?
Well, at least there are no politics in this one.
Yeah, I do appreciate that.
These days, that's downright dangerous.
Yeah. I would start with, is this the airline employee's right to have an opinion about this, or is it part of your carriage of contract or whatever they call it on your ticket? And is there a better way to escalate it? So maybe they do have some discretion. I've never seen that happen, but I guess it could. And what would be another way to potentially escalate that and resolve it properly and get to keep your pearls? So that would be my first question: is is it absolute authority of the airline person to just say, "Nah, you look pretty sick. You're not getting on the flight today"?
Yeah, we actually had a somewhat similar situation. My wife and I were flying when she was 7 months pregnant, and we called the airline and asked their protocol. And do we need a note? Do we need the doctor certification? They said, no, until the 8th month, you can, or the 9th month, you don't have to worry about it. When we got to the airport, the gate agent gave us a hard time. And it took some negotiating to get on the plane. So,
and I noticed you're not wearing your pearls today, Yonason. So
I only wore those for special anniversary issues.
Yeah, right. You know what comes up for me is, and which is kind of funny because I tend to skew, as my husband will tell you, to be a real rule follower. But in this situation, to me, it feels like a rule that was made to be broken, because here's the thing: when you leave the human equation out of the rule, to me, it's a bad rule. And I think so often we get so fixated on black and white rule, rather than thinking about the situation critically and about what's really the human thing to do, the best thing to do for the human in that situation. And I think that's this is a situation where someone who's very much a rule follower perhaps was the gate agent, although I don't think that actually could be true, because they were able to be bribed. So how rule follower
Yeah, right,
can you
right.
be? But that they weren't able to see the human behind this very black and white corporate rule.
And you
If there
remind me of
wasn't,
that.
if there actually was a rule that
Yeah,
said that.
you remind me of that scene in Pirates of the Caribbean where he says, "Pirates Code is more like guidelines than actual rules."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It does sound like it. I personally am absolutely of the opinion that the woman was a hero. I'm also of the opinion that it should have been unnecessary
Yes.
heroics. Because I'm sort of with you, Peter. What? Are you going to make that kind of rule? And while there is a great deal of latitude for public facing employees in most airlines, I'm not at all sure that that latitude includes denying a dying man his last wish.
Well, but the other side of that might be, let's assume there is a rule. Now, the fact that this person was
Okay.
bribed, whatever, but what's the point of the rule? Like, what would happen if, God
Yeah.
forbid, the person got on the plane, it's a 10-hour flight or 12-hour flight to Israel, an hour or two, they drop dead, or there's a medical emergency, whatever. Does the airline have to turn the plane back and inconvenience all these other people? Do you like what? I don't know what the
What goes
pluses
behind?
and minuses are for
I
looking at
actually
it.
heard a horrible story like that where
Yeah.
husband and wife
No,
were
right.
traveling, and then one of them died, and they basically put a blanket over the deceased, and then the spouse had to sit next to. I mean, it's just, you can't even think about it, but
Yeah, right. So
things like that
that's what
happen.
I'm saying. So if you think about it from that perspective, if the person, died an hour later on the plane and a lot of people were exposed to that, or children, like, I don't know, is there a health thing? Is there a medical thing? Like, there's got to be a reason, like, if there's probably a reason that it's either a rule or not, or it was even thought to be a rule. And in what cases would it make sense? If somebody's, grabbing their heart, looks like in the middle of a heart attack, maybe boarding's not a smart thing. And then I think the question becomes, well, okay, well, if someone's wishes, does that, at what cost the dying wish, right?
Or, if I may be blunt, how much medical school did that gate agent have?
Right. Well, I think it reminds me that if something is really important to us, how critical it is to set ourselves up for success in advance of the situation. So yes, he brought a hospice worker with him. That's fantastic. It would have probably behooved him to have that hospice worker call the airline in advance, like you and your wife did, Jonathan,
Yeah.
and talk through this scenario. Well, what if something happens? In that, how can they set themselves up for success before they get to the gate agent, where they have a written piece of paper from the airline saying this gentleman has our blessing to board the plane. Because how often can we avoid these tough situations if we just think ahead and set ourselves up for success?
And honestly, I have seen people in waiting areas who look absolutely frail, and I've been a little bit nervous about whether or not I'm going to be seated anywhere near them, because I have no medical expertise. I'd probably just be in the way. And I've never seen any of these people who either looked frail or somewhat incapacitated. I've never seen anybody denied boarding privileges.
No,
Or
nor
that
have I. And you know what?
apparent.
There before the grace of God go all of us, right? I mean, I've seen people board with oxygen tanks, and I've seen
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
board with, with a variety of health issues. And I've not ever experienced someone being denied for that reason.
There's also a raft of protocols that the
Yeah.
flight crews are trained in for any number of things. I actually heard somebody tell me that she'd been trained on what to do if somebody's service animal got loose and wasn't paying attention to anybody.
Mhm.
Nobody could get their attention and command them. And I said, well, first of all, that's highly unlikely because the service animals are trained to it fairly well. I said, second, you really have to get trained in that kind of thing. She said, oh, yes, there are a raft of possibilities,
Sure.
and we have to know what to do in any of them. So they have a protocol in place. Not
That's
because
great.
we expect someone dying to board, but because somebody could board and then die.
Well, but stay there for a minute. When you mentioned the service animal or the emotional support animal issue, that was an issue that people took advantage of. Like the airlines had to go the other way because everybody was claiming that their pet giraffe or whatever was
Was their comfort animal, right?
Yeah, right. And
Only a small
partly they were
exaggeration.
doing- no, but partly they were doing it to avoid the fees, and then partly they were doing it so the animal didn't have to ride in the steerage or whatever it is underneath. And then it got to the point where, okay, there can't be such a thing as an emotional support chihuahua. Like there's a point where it's like everybody was doing it, and then the airlines had to crack the code the other way. So I think that's a different, variation on the theme of when you don't have a rule and people take advantage, then you put in a rule and they tend to be too stringent, and then you take out the human discretion part of it. I mean, the fact that this person, I think we're kind of missing, maybe missing the key point is, well, but for a string of pearls, wink, wink, go the other way. Like that's
just
that,
wrong.
right.
That is absolutely wrong. And I'm not normally a very punitive individual, but I would be delighted to find out that individual either doesn't have a job or doesn't have that job anymore.
Yeah.
Because
well, there's definitely an opportunity for some
precedent.
training in that situation. And I think though that goes back to that. Are the gate agents given the kind of development opportunities to understand, to parse out what the right decision is in the moment? And I think different airlines treat it in different ways. Like I think Southwest gives their frontline people quite a bit of latitude to solve problems and deal with that. Other airlines are, you have to follow this script and do it this way. And I tend to think hiring people and teaching them to think critically and empathetically in situations is going to serve the organization in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Kimberly, because I hadn't thought of this really till just now, but it's something that I talk about a lot in my ethics training. That you may remember a few years ago when United had overbooked a flight, and they
The guy
they were
off.
offering, I think it was up to $800 for somebody to get off, and nobody did. And so then they picked the gate agent picked a passenger at random. Turned out to be a doctor who needed to get to a surgery. They dragged him off the plane, literally bloodied him up. It was the biggest loss, the biggest scandal of the year, a multi-million lawsuit, and the stock value plummeted $1 billion shortly thereafter. And all because the gate agent didn't have the authority to go above a certain number, which to me says that the management doesn't trust its employees.
Right.
Or just doesn't prepare them for these types of contingencies. Either way, you're creating a situation, and it could be something like that here, where aside from the bribery, which sometimes makes problems disappear, but the gate agent might have said, well, I just don't want to risk my job by allowing something that might happen because that's above my pay grade.
Right.
But that also goes to what Peter had said. If you're that uncertain, where is the trust level with the leadership team there that gate agent wasn't calling anybody and saying, hey, look, we've got a bit of dilemma here.
Yeah.
this is what I think is the appropriate way to respond. And obviously, it's not a popular decision. Can you come out here?
Well, and I think going back to the airline piece, I think the other thing is knowing what your rights are and aren't. The airline does, because United and they were like tone deaf to this, said, well, we have the right to remove anyone from a plane for any reason at any time. Okay, this guy I think was in his 70s, an elderly man, and they knocked out two of his and was pretty violent the way they
Yeah.
out of his seat. And you're like, okay, but I mean, you have a right to beat the heck out of somebody because he said no. Now, should he have said yeah, whatever? But they tried to justify it saying, well, rule number whatever says we have the right to remove you from the plane. One would assume that would be in a civil manner, but you know, honestly, that was really
Unfortunately, that's a
Yeah.
large assumption.
But I guess my question is, do sometimes we think we have rights that we don't? Like when you're on an airplane or in public, things that we don't even think about these things because there's sort of outlier cases to say, do I have the right to not give up my seat when they tell me to?
Yeah.
Do they have the right to do it? Probably legally, but
probably in that
will
small
every
print that nobody
person on that
reads.
plane that observed it and every person that watched that newsreel who saw that story decide to fly with a different airline? Likely. So, you know, do you have the right, but is it right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. So having the right doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my regular guests, Jennifer Elder, likes to say that you know, lawful quickly becomes awful.
That's true.
And of course, that's
Certainly
where
can.
ethics comes in. Yeah. Joshua has a comment. It's a little off topic, but he says, "What about passengers who are their body type takes up more than one seat?" Um, it's sort of an interesting. Should they be required to buy two seats, or does it have more to do with the airline making the seats too small so they can cram in more passengers? A few different directions you can go on that one.
I had
Oh,
that scenario where I was on a cross-country flight and I go to my seat and I'm on the aisle and there was a woman in the middle seat that was clearly 600 pounds. And I knew because this had happened to me before, she's going to take half my seat. So I went back towards the front and said, hey, listen, I don't want to cause a thing. Kind of, that's your job, but this isn't going to work. Like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
but can we find another seat? Can there be somewhere? What can we do to accommodate this? But this is a long flight. I've got work to do. I've paid for all 28 inches.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not a small guy. Like I'm 200 pounds, you know, like I'm not petite. And the first agent said, well, not my problem. And then the second one said, oh, well, you want to make a big stinker? I'm like, no, I don't want to do anything, but like I paid, you know,
Yeah.
I paid for what I paid for. It's not fair to me. I don't want to have a confrontation with this person. Clearly they know they're large. There are different rules around whatever. I'm not versed in them, but all I know is I want my seat.
Yeah.
And they kind of were trying to make me the bad guy. And I was like, I'll move like, I just don't want to be uncomfortable for 6 hours. Like,
you know, I actually had that experience, and I kind of notice those things because I'm kind of on the small side. And I've had people just like, oh, thank you, when they find out I'm in the middle seat, you know, which is not always a very good thing. But I had somebody sitting in the aisle seat, sitting in the middle seat. I was in the aisle, and the person sat down and proceeded to be, frankly, a little obnoxious. And the flight attendant came by and looked, and it was somebody I knew because I was flying a lot in those days. And I kind of shook my head, got up and went to the back. And I said, Maggie, this is going to be really rough. Is there anything that can happen? And she said, we've got a couple of options. So she came up to the row and said, sir, it's obvious that even the extension is not going to be comfortable for you or safe for you. And he started to get up and say, well, you could always upgrade me to first class. And I remember thinking, what? And Maggie said, I have an idea. And she turned to me and she said, Kimi, do you have everything? I said, I do. Come with me. And she upgraded me and gave him my seat on top of his existing seat. And I remember asking her, are you going to get in trouble for this? Because I didn't want to cause a problem. I had no problem with taking the offer. However, I also thought to myself, oh man. And oddly enough, if it weren't for that person being just a hair on the obnoxious side, I would have endorsed him going instead. So I was a little ashamed of myself. I thought, oh man, all it took was for somebody to be mean-spirited and you're just ready to go for it, are you? So I did that.
That's so interesting, Kimmy, that the way you took that in is feeling bad and instead of feeling absolutely joyful.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we're going to spend the rest of this episode analyzing you, Kimmy.
Oh dear.
I'm going to teach you to be more
That could
selfish.
take more than one episode. I don't think that'd be a good idea. But there are multiple reactions to situations, and there are people. This gentleman was clearly not one of those people, and his hospice worker was clearly not one of those people who was looking to take advantage of the odds, if you will. And yet then you do run into people who have calculated the odds and the probabilities, and they're perfectly willing to make somebody else
That's also
uncomfortable.
why rules for the sake of rules, I think, don't apply to everyone, because you leave out the human equation. You leave out the fact that this is an elderly man's dying wish. You leave out the fact that it's a long flight and you've got 8 hours to sit next to someone and you've got to get some work done. You leave out the fact that this guy is going to make you uncomfortable. Like you cannot leave. That's all part of the truth, right? And a rule doesn't look at and look at the situation and the nuances involved. This is the way it is. And I think that that's problematic. And it's one of the reasons that we've stopped to learn how to think critically for ourselves, is because, organizations just in institutions, all the way from our school system to our businesses, want to just say, this is the way to do it. Don't think for yourself, just do it this way as part of the industrial age. And we're still living, dragging that along with us, instead of, okay, let's look at the nuance of what it means to be a human being in these complicated situations, and have conversations about what's the best way to handle this for all people concerned.
That's why I like to say that compliance is often the enemy of ethics, because we're basically abdicating human judgment to a set of regulations.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can exempt myself. I have no responsibility because I'm in compliance. I'm following the letter of the law.
And I don't have any responsibility for what kind of harm it causes, because I did the right thing. And then we take it one step further and we actually punish people who say, okay, really, does that make the best sense in this situation? Come on.
So you say, this is a baseline.
There are things that are black and white, and then there are things that are gray. So even,
I've for a podcast.
Yeah, good. Yeah, exactly. No, but we've all, I think, had the experience of, you go to check your bag at the luggage, it would stick with the airport, and it's 50.9, you're like a half a pound over. And so what the airline wants you to do is take out a sweatshirt and bring it with you on the plane. So the same weight is going, but the smart agent will go, okay, no big deal. Right. But then you have others that are sticklers, right? Where if it's like, 3 grams over.
2 ounces.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's rules and then there's discretion. Now there's a black and white one. At what point do we have to pull back if somebody else says, well, 51 pounds is good, 53, what's 65?
And somebody might say, well, if everyone were to do it, then we'd have a real problem, right? So this is why this podcast is so powerful and so important, because it forces people to think through the gray.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a couple of airline
And
stories
at
while
least
we're at
acknowledge
it.
that the gray exists.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
and that it's
go back to root cause analysis. Okay,
And-
we have a problem situation here. How come? Is
I
it
just gave a
because
talk on
that
this.
passenger wanted to be a jerk?
Yeah, well, we default to binary thinking because
Right.
we think it's easier. But my wife was standing in line at the airport with her bag, and in front of her were active military with a military dog in its carrier, and the gate agent wouldn't let it on because they said it was above, it was too big. And they said, no, there's an exception for these. And she refused to accept that, even though they clearly had done their research, and she didn't go to verify with anybody. She turned away active military. My wife's
Wow.
behind her. She has a duffel bag. Now, a duffel bag is soft. So, those inches that they measure are not exact. But
Right.
she measured it in a way that it came out an inch over. So my wife, who was very resourceful at times, went to TSA and said, "Do you have any duct tape?
Tape,
To
yeah.
wrap it around it." And the guy at TSA said, "I got a better idea." He put shrink wrap around it
That's great.
and then put a tag on it that said it had been checked.
Yeah.
And then you just see the difference in customer service.
Yeah.
One person is trying to solve your problem, and the other person is creating a problem that may not even be there in the first place.
Right.
My wife and I, we had to travel on October 8th. I still remember what October 7th was. And we were late. We weren't able to book because of the holiday to check in, so we got like the worst seating. And we got on, and the whole plane was filled. And my wife grabbed the first seat she saw. Right? And as we're getting ready for takeoff, she pulls out the traveler's prayer, which we say, which is in Hebrew. And the woman sitting next to her says, "Oh, is that Hebrew?" Yeah. Proceeds to identify herself as a Palestinian, and then begins to tell my wife about all the horrible things that Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And after a few minutes of that, my wife called over the flight attendant and said, "Excuse me." This woman told her what I was, she said, "I'll take care of him." There was one empty seat on the plane. And she picked up my wife and moved her there. What I liked about your story, Kimi, is that rather than rewarding the obnoxious guy by moving him into first class, she rewarded you for trying to resolve the situation as amicably as possible.
And you will always remember Maggie. And I will always remember Maggie now too.
I used to joke that it was one of those, push me, pull you situations. If you fly too much on the same airline, on the same route, come on, everybody in this place, you are going to get to know some of the people that are there to keep you safe, probably better than maybe some of your own neighbors. And I was always very careful, and I suspect that I'm not alone on this panel, not to take advantage of that. Because that's an ethical thing, it wouldn't be right. And that's why for a moment I felt a little guilty. It was amazing. A glass of really nicely brewed coffee in a real cup did a lot to assuage the guilt. But I think that's also part of it. We do have to recognize that the world is no longer so simple. And that's why I love the discussions that you host. It's not so simple as black and white always. There are so many opportunities where you have to use your judgment.
Well, the other thing that came up as you were talking, Kimmy, because you were saying that everyone on this panel likely has flown so much that we have relationships. It really is all about relationships and having relationships with people supports you in being able to have conversations that might be uncomfortable. it supports you to being able to take a different perspective and to hear things in a different way. And so being able to think critically and learning how to develop relationships and develop a sense of connectedness with other people, even if you don't have the time to develop a relationship, will serve you in every situation.
I can't remember, forgive me, or I would attribute it. There was a scientist that crafted a whole philosophy around the difference between strong ties, us with you, for example, and weak ties, the person who takes my dry cleaning in.
Right.
I know her first name. I have no idea what her last name is. I have no idea how many children she has. I mean, if she suddenly disappeared, I would miss her. And when I went on an extended trip recently, I came back, I brought her my jacket. She said, "Where have you been?" Those are relationships. They're built on what? 90-second exchanges.
Right. Right.
But they're weak ties, and they
Yeah.
still matter.
Well, I'll date myself. And by the way, Joshua in the comments says, Kimberly, you're right on point for your last comment.
Thank you, Joshua.
I used to go to the bank with my father when I was, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. He would walk in the bank. He would go over to the manager, chat with him, call each other by name. He'd talk to the manager's secretary. They talk. He'd go to the teller. The tellers all knew him.
Mhm.
And, I thought that was just the way things worked. And maybe they did back then. But I remember him complaining, several years later that, the manager retired and the secretary retired and the turnover among the tellers was so fast, nobody knew who he was. And, something's lost when we don't have that kind of intimacy. It might be convenient to have, big box stores and online and self-serve at the pump and all that type of stuff. But we lose that sense of community and connection.
And by the way, it's absolutely crummy for our mental and emotional health, it turns out.
But I think we can develop relationships in a way that we don't even, most of us don't think about. Like I go for a walk every day, and I was walking with my son a few months ago. And on my walking route, there's this guy who's always fishing, and he's always fishing with a dog. I see him every day, right? And I walk by him every day. And so my son was walking with me, and I looked at the guy with the fishing pole and I said, "Hey, I see you every day. I feel like I should know your name." And he's like, "I'm Reggie, and this is my dog." I can't remember his dog's name now, Dixie. And I'm like, "Hi, Reggie. Hi, Dixie. So nice to meet you." And I, walked on, and my son's like, "Oh, Mom, how embarrassing." But now when I walk every day, when I see Reggie and his dog, I'm like, "Hey, Reggie, how you doing?" He says, "Great, Kimberly. How are you?" And it's these little tiny connections. And during COVID, I would walk the same route outside every day and see the same people. We'd be way far away from each other, but we knew each other's name. And it felt like, okay, we're not alone in this. And I think, if we can, when we go to a gate agent, instead of, this is the rule and this is what we need to do. If "Hey, Bob, it's so nice to meet you. We're really looking forward to flying. Let me let you know what the situation is," and talk to him, not as he's the gate agent, but he's Bob, the guy that in his heart of hearts cares about human beings. And you see that in him, even if it's not evident, right? You would be surprised how many people will meet you when you go to those places.
But I think the reality is, now when you look at it, the times that we have to talk to a gate agent or go into the bank and talk to somebody or whatever, it's usually an unpleasant time, or it's escalated. It's something that, the ATM jammed up, or you don't go to the gate agent to say good morning. You go to the gate agent because something's, your flight's canceled, like you need something, you want something, you're stressed out.
Yeah.
It's not what, because everything else is automated, right? I got my boarding pass on my phone and this, that, and the other thing. If things go according to plan, the amount of human interaction I have during that transaction is reduced, right?
That's so sad, isn't it? And that's really kind of sad.
I
Well,
think
it's the way it is,
also,
right?
but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
It absolutely doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
You can ask a very simple question. You can let them know that, you know, you've got an issue. So for example, I carry on. I know you guys probably, all of you probably also carry on. And I hurt my shoulder literally
Right.
getting out of from TSA to the gate. I hurt my shoulder and I said, look, I know that you folks are not supposed to help me with this. I said, somebody ran into me and wrenched my shoulder a little bit.
Yep.
How can I get a little bit of help? I just need a little bit of help to rebalance it so it goes up into the overhead. Don't worry about it. For one thing, there are a bunch of people who are going to be boarding ahead of you, and I suspect one of them will notice you're in distress and they'll help. But if not,
Yeah.
ask the flight attendant if, you know, if they can just work with you, not do it for you, but work with you. And it was not a big deal. I didn't want to check my bag. I never want to check my bag. And I knew that there was a rule that I was essentially asking them to reconsider strict adherence to. Very upfront, as Kimberly said, connecting with a person.
Yeah.
Right.
And sure enough, actually, when I got on board, and this does happen on occasion, somebody saw me pulling it and they turned out to be somebody who had seen me get bumped coming out of the TSA line. And he said, why don't you let me take care of that?
Yeah.
So the takeaway from today's episode is not always carry pearls when flying, because that could
Because you might be tempted to use them.
Yeah.
As a rug.
Yeah.
It might have been a one pearl, not the whole necklace kind of tip or something.
But you know, people will, like, I know, to your point, Peter, when we're in line, it's usually because something's gone wrong. But what I'm working on doing more frequently is when I get up to the front saying, you guys must be going through it today. I know this must be incredibly stressful. And all of a sudden it takes the pressure off and we can have a human to human connection.
Well, I have a friend that actually every time he flies, it's like a little hack that he does. He brings a mini bag of individually wrapped either M&Ms or something like that, or Snickers, and hands it to the first
So that's his pearls.
That's his pearl. No, but he says, I know you all work hard and everybody likes candy and I just happen to have it. He always happens to have it, whatever. And that's his sort of, but it changes the tone. Like, because if everybody's coming grumpy, can you do like, here's a little bag of candy. Everybody likes candy, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back to that in the next section, but you got me thinking when you're talking about the human interaction. I remember going in for my global entry card, and you have to go through the security interview.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I sit down and wait my turn, can sit down. They ask me some questions, very serious, young man, military bearing, and he says, okay, I'm going to need to take your fingerprints. And I said, will you give them back when you're done? My kids, by the way,
that's the dad joke portion of today's programming, right? That's the dad joke portion of today's program.
Yeah, but yeah, he looked up with this look of absolute bewilderment on his face. He says, what? And he paused. He said, that's actually funny. And that's what he said. He said, nobody ever jokes in here. They're all terrified.
Yeah.
I know.
They asked me when this guy's day, friend. I gave him a little bit of
absolutely
a little bit of a smile. In the
a little lightness.
Yeah.
Well, and if you think about that from the human perspective, what must their job be like day in and day out to have everybody in front of them going, yes, sir. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So again, putting yourself in their shoes goes a really, really long way.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So,
you find
Joshua has a comment here. It says 90% of my success in life has come from perfecting how to mirror subconscious behavior and establish rapid rapport to create immediate relationships.
That's mirror neurons at work.
There you go.
Oh, yes.
You want to mirror the right people.
Exactly.
And pacing. But there's also just the awareness. You know,
Right.
if you find any of the things that we've been talking about to be totally alien to you, you might want to ask yourself, why is that something I wouldn't have done? Why is that an approach I might not have taken? Because it doesn't mean that you're a horrible person. It just means, just like everybody else, not just in this room, we all have room to grow in terms of self-awareness and also in terms of the radius of our empathy.
Well, I
And
think, we didn't
compassion.
talk about the woman much at all, but I mean, think about that. Would I have taken off my Rolex, which I don't own, and handed it so that I could get a stranger onto the plane? I mean, would that have ever
Stranger
even
But
you
she's
could
got a
occurred to you?
need to
history
care
too. Maybe
for.
she's, had an ailing father. Maybe, maybe she, Israel holds a really strong, special place in her heart. Like, who knows what her history is? Could be the pearls were fake, like, who knows? And what the backstory is there, right?
I was thinking the punchline would have been great if the pearls were fake.
Yeah,
Have been the true.
who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
It sounds like that De Maupassant story, the necklace.
Oh gosh.
All right, I'll
I-
let people look that one up on their own.
I think that there's a lot to be said for when someone makes a commitment, the lengths they will go to fulfill that commitment. And she had made a commitment to care for and see him safely on his way. And
Yeah.
by golly, that commitment didn't come with an expiration date or a measurement stick for the depth.
And it wasn't
And
enough for her to be in compliance.
That's right. And that's why I said, I think she was a hero. I just am sad that she had to be one. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's the need. There should never be need for heroes, actually. Right?
Wouldn't that be lovely?
We should never have to create. We should never find ourselves in those situations. I mean, I suppose natural disasters are one thing, but why should I need to go above and beyond because somebody else won't even step up?
Yeah.
But that's life, and
But you know what's so beautiful about that story, I think, is not the bribery piece, but but the fact that she cared so deeply, and that for her it wasn't just a job.
Yeah.
She was there for the man.
Mhm.
But aren't there
And I
certain
think
things that-
that is something that if we can do more of that, that we invest ourselves in that way, in what we do, whether it's work or life, or life outside of work, that's what's pretty remarkable to me.
But aren't there certain things that we think we'd always do? Like, wow, that was his dying wish. What would I do to give someone their dying wish? So, I mean, pearls are obviously valuable, but a person probably felt pretty good about being able to do that.
Yeah. But I think that's true. When we give of ourselves in a way to make a positive impact, we do get that back. We do feel good. It touches on our values, and it ignites our own sense of joy. And we forget that yes, it might seem altruistic, but the truth is when we give of ourselves because we care deeply, we get back way more than we give. She probably got way more back.
But I was saying we'd probably try harder in certain situations, like a dying wish, right? If it was
sure.
an ordinary
But I
trip,
think
the
thing is, Peter, is we could do this on a daily basis, in a situation by situation basis. We just get so focused on our own agenda and our own, fire of the day that we're not mindful of it. But are there opportunities to do that every day? Yeah, absolutely.
And there's another comment here from Joshua, and we'll wrap up with this because it goes back to your baggage story, Kimi. Never be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
When we ask people, most people want to help other people.
Right.
Because it connects, we connect with our own humanity that way, and we connect with others.
Well,
And we know what it's like when we need help, and we want it. It feels good to give. When we say, we tell people we teach our kids it's better to give than to receive, and we sort of believe it on some level. But we're so conditioned to take what you can and get what you can.
Yeah.
That we have to remind ourselves constantly that it is a wonderful thing to give, and to give someone else the opportunity to give.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a great gift
And I
as
think
well.
that
That's
is
huge.
probably the big point. And on a practical level, if you don't ask, the answer is no.
That's
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
You always risk
And people
you
don't
always risk a
connect with
yes.
perfection either. You know, if you
Right.
think you're perfect and you don't need help, people don't connect with perfection because there is no such thing as perfection. People connect with other human beings who tend to be vulnerable, just like them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we'll carry on a bit in the next section, but this has been a wonderful conversation, as it
Thanks
often
for
is.
having us on,
Really
Jonathan.
enjoyed
Uh,
it.
so
Thank
thank
you.
you,
So
Kimberly
nice to
Davis.
have met you two.
Yeah, so
Peter
lovely
Winick.
to meet you as well, Kimmy, and it's
Me.
nice to see you again, Peter. And I'm sad I didn't get the purple memo.
Oh my word.
Next time.
I think this is blue, actually, but okay. Anyway, for those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information, send it in. If it's compelling, we will use it for a future episode. And thank you, Joshua, for your comments and helping stir the pot in a good way. And as always, until next time, I encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.
Take care.